Tonight on Free Minds TV, the wussification of America continues. We'll also be discussing cities filing for bankruptcy. Apparently they're being dragged down by this economy too. We'll also be discussing a man who was sent to jail for roofing his house. That plus a whole lot more coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
Thank you very much to everyone for tuning in to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you, as always, is Toby.
And Nick.
We've got a lot to discuss tonight, Nick. I think it's important every now to bring up some articles to touch on really just, as you said, the wussification of America. Everyone has to be safe, whether it be on the playground or on the school bus or eating their lunch, or parents making sure that they have all the right child find software on their smartphones, in touch with the FBI and other law enforcement databases, whatever it is out there, walking to school.
There's a lot less tolerance for just letting kids be kids and take some risks.
Learn from mistakes. You know, it does actually have dire consequences. We're not just saying this because we want to be tough on kids. No, when you actually safety-proof your house, when you go out there and make playgrounds foolproof, when you bring up your kids in a sterile environment, well, it has dire health effects, dire consequences to developmental learning,
and kids,
taking risks.
There's been an impact. You mentioned developmental learning, but yeah, there's been an impact on social skills among young people too, because a lot of kids aren't really allowed to go outside and play with other kids of their own age, at least not in person. Maybe they have play days, but a lot of kids these days are just, they're going to spend that time maybe playing with other kids their own age, on their Xbox. But that, you don't develop social skills that way, and you don't develop life skills and learn to assess risk and things like that, like you're going to need to do in the real world in a few years. When people say kids, it goes so fast, they grow up so fast. Yeah, they really do. Yep. So even when they're kids, they need to be learning about how to function in the real world as adults, because it's not really going to be an eternity before they are adults and they need to take care of themselves.
Right, and those crucial learning years are taking place when they're young. So we'll be getting into a couple of different stories about the latest round of making sure that everybody is a bunch of wusses out there, and I guess this would go for some adults as well, not just kids, but society in general. Also, we have to discuss some ridiculous stories, such as a man going to jail for shingling his own roof. We're also going to first, though, touch on the economy. It's on everybody's minds. How can you avoid it? Yes, I know that it can be boring to think about, but you know what? It is important to continue to think about, continue to pay attention to, because it really does affect everything you do. Yes, the S&P credit downgrade of the U.S. government, that might just be boring to you, and you say, how can I change it? Well, you got to pay attention to it, because if you don't, not paying attention to it is how the U.S. got into this mess in the first place, how the markets are all fluctuating all over in the first place, because 10, 20, 15 years ago, however long, 30 years ago is when this stuff really started churning, people weren't paying attention. 5 years ago, people still weren't paying attention. It's time to start paying attention, so we are going to talk about this. This first story, to jump off the horrible situation of the economy, was sent in by a listener. Actually, I don't have the name in front of me, but thanks for sending it in. You can send stories via our website. There's a little contact button, and easily send us whatever's on your mind. But this listener sent in or a viewer, I guess, maybe a listener, I'm not sure, sent in this story, because we do the radio show as well, sent in this story coming out of theguardian.co.uk about Central Falls bankruptcy means a grim present for the city with a bright future. And this is talking about individual cities and municipalities actually going bankrupt as well. We talk about how the federal government's headed towards bankruptcy. Well, it's easy for them to avoid it because they have a printing press. They can just print more money or raise the debt ceiling once again and just take on more and more debt. Or it seems that way, at least for a few more years.
For a little while.
And a lot of debt. But it's much harder for, say, a state or a city or a town to take on debt. So when the S&P downgrades credit ratings and it costs more in interest and the economy's faltering and income isn't coming in, towns have all these unfounded mandates, it's much harder for them to get out of it, print some extra dollars, raise their debt ceiling, etc. So as I said, coming out of Central Falls, Rhode Island, which bills itself as a city with a bright future, well, its present looks bleak. The tiny city of 18,000 people claims to be the smallest, most densely populated in the U.S. Now, as another claim to fame, it is the first city in the state of Rhode Island to go bankrupt. Cities across the U.S. are facing bankruptcy as the economy threatens to a double-dip recession, saddled by the Standard & Poor's cut to the U.S. credit rating, as well as all sorts of unemployment numbers, not bringing in the same dollar amounts as they used to be. Cities just can't make ends meet. And why is this? Well, it's not just because they can't pay for their current libraries or public schools or fire department, police, etc. It's because, like the federal government, like state governments, they have huge unfunded liabilities. Yes, the library is already closed. You can't just shut that up in Central Falls. Services have been cut everywhere. The entire teachers union has been fired. I guess that has to do with some issues around not making adequate yearly progress, etc. Firefighters are being offered 20 cents on the dollar for some of their unfunded liabilities. I mean, this city is definitely in trouble. And why is this? Well, it's the same reason why you at home might get into trouble if you put your entire life on a credit card, just hoping things would get better tomorrow. Well, when this city of Central Falls, town of Central Falls, whatever you want to call it here, when they were doing well and prosperous and bringing in that tax dollars, bringing in the money, they were still putting things on the future credit card. They were still promising pensions, allowing firefighters, police officers to retire after just 20 years. So it's no wonder that when things get rough, you can't afford those bills. It doesn't take a genius to figure this out. And that's why I said, yes, the economy is boring. Nick wanted to talk about it, but I've been doing the only one talking, I guess. I think it's important to talk about because it doesn't take a genius. This should have been thought of 20 years ago when they were putting these future liabilities on the credit card, saying, oh, future taxpayers will pay for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been a problem not only with the federal government doing it, and they've been probably the biggest single abuser of just, paying for, spending the money and then figuring out how you're going to pay for it later. But we've had a problem with this on the federal level. Many states, I mean, all the states to one extent or another are facing a situation where they've had to trim budgets or raise taxes. But it's happened on every level. I mean, we've really been living in an age, the 80s and the 90s, there was a tremendous prosperity, but it was largely, a good part of it was fueled by debt. And it was all built on the shaky foundation of a shaky monetary policy. In the 90s and into the early 2000s, we saw a very easy Fed. And we're seeing the same thing again. I mean, the only solutions to this problem, and the proposed solution here that people in power in Washington, D.C. and at the Federal Reserve are coming up with is that we just can't allow things to get back to normal. That's what we're talking about. We've seen a massive debt binge, the biggest debt binge in the history of human civilization. And the answer here is we can't possibly let businesses go bankrupt. We can't possibly see government budgets slashed. We can't possibly allow markets to work. I mean, we're currently living in an economy where the Federal Reserve, I mean, over this past week, and we're recording in the middle of the week, so we don't actually know how the markets closed on Friday or anything like that. But the Federal Reserve just promised to keep rates low for another 2 years into 2013. Essentially, we've got a situation where the Fed is saying they are going to backstop everything. The stock market cannot go anywhere but up. And they have the power to do it, which strikes me as insane. You've got this handful of central bankers who control the value of the money because they can print more of it, and they determine the borrowing costs of money for banks. They're essentially saying banks get to borrow free money from the Fed, or damn near free money. Maybe you pay 0.25% at most for 2 years, 2 more years. They've been doing this for almost 3 now. And that's if they don't come up with another if the markets continue to do poorly, they'll probably come up with another proposal where they're just going to directly inject money into the economy, just buy bonds. So we've got this central bank that's just saying, we're not going to allow a recession to happen. That's a very dangerous thing because
The
a recession was
problem
needed.
is, Nick, they can't control that. That's the other issue. It would be one thing if they actually had
they can delay it.
Right, they can stop it from actually happening and correcting itself, but they can't actually jumpstart the economy, as we've seen over the last 2-3 years. I mean, if since 2008 the market crash hasn't taught people something, I'm not really sure what will at this point.
Well, after the first 2 stimulus packages were removed, the first 2 Fed programs were removed, the first 2 rounds of quantitative easing, what we got was the market wanted to correct downward. The market was propped up by these QE programs. Every when the programs would kick in, the markets would go up because you're injecting billions upon billions of dollars into the economy. So of course it's going to spur investment. You're injecting all these new dollars. Or you're
but that
freeing
money
up
needs to be
dollars
paid back in some way or another, whether it's with
through
interest rates or through
inflation.
inflation. It's got to be paid back. It's not free money. There's no such thing as free money, and I think that's something that the American people need to realize. You can spend on the credit card, and it really feels like free money while you're spending on it. But eventually, that bill will come due somehow. And that's what's happening right now across the nation, in households, on city levels, on state levels, and on the federal level. It's all across the board. We've been a nation that's spending on the credit card for far too long, and guess what? It's time to start paying some of that back. I don't want to pay it back. I don't want to pay off my credit card. That sucks. I already had that vacation. I already had fun with the money that I owe. I don't want to pay that. That's no fun at all. But you know what? It's got to be done. You can't just go about business as usual. I'm sorry, but we're to the point in this nation, on the city, on the state, on the federal level, where if you stopped all services, and that's what this story is highlighting from Rhode Island, from Central Falls, Rhode Island, they already closed the library. They've already fired most of the people who work for the city government. And they still can't make ends meet because they owe so much money to these unfunded liabilities. And it just can't go on forever.
No, it can't. I mean, Alan Greenspan actually made the absurd statement. I mean, I wanted to reach through, Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, and he in large part, his policies led to the formation of the housing bubble that kicked off the crisis. But so I don't know if I take him too seriously anyway. He had the audacity to say that S&P should not have downgraded the U.S. credit rating because the U.S. cannot default because they can always print the money to pay it back.
Did he actually say that?
That's a former chairman of the Federal Reserve. Absolute moronic thing to say. If you were an economics student in college and you said that, I feel like you should be slapped across your face because that's a stupid. That is a first grader's view of economics.
Well, at this point,
and the
Nick,
chairman,
the
former chairman of the Federal Reserve, said that, and he has been critical of Bernanke for being too loose and crazy.
Well, at this point, it's getting to be what's the other choice, Nick? At some point, there isn't.
There's very little doubt in my mind that they will effectively default by printing the money.
Right.
It's a question of when.
Yeah.
But
they've been doing it.
We're reaching the point where it's just mathematically.
Well, the dollar's lost 40% of its spending power in the last decade. That's almost half its spending power in the last year.
It sounds like a lot, and people might be like, well, prices haven't gone off that much. Supermarket prices.
I'm not making 40% more in my paycheck.
I'm not making, wages have not increased. And if you go
not by 40%.
If you forget the government numbers and you actually look at take a look at your household budget from now versus 10 years ago, look at how much you spend on gas, look at how much you spend on groceries, look at how much you spend on most of the basic necessities. They've all gone up significantly. Yep. That'll continue to happen. And frankly, wages, with a 10% unemployment rate, wages are not going up anytime soon. There's no incentive for employers to pay people more. So we are facing that dreaded inflation scenario.
Right.
It's on our doorstep.
So. It is. We don't have the answers here, and I don't want to pretend like we do.
I'm not sure there's a good answer.
That's the problem. There is not a good answer. But one thing, if you take nothing else from this episode, at least from this segment, if you don't take anything else from it, we cannot go about business as usual. The credit card is due. I'm sorry. It sucks for all of us. All right, we do need to move on to other stories. I'm sure we'll cover this because as the Fed has said, we're in this at least until 2013. By essentially saying we're going to keep interest rates near zero until mid-2013, they said there's no hope for their economy. That's what they said. So I'm sure we'll continue to cover this, but it's important to move on to other issues. Let's talk about a man who has been jailed for roofing his own house. See, this is the problem with a big government. You have asinine rules.
Right. Well, first they bankrupted, this generation and probably the next 2 or 3 to come. And they also tell you what you can and can't do with the property you can still manage to afford with the depressed wages, the inflation, and all the taxes they rip out of the paycheck you do manage to get. It's lovely, isn't it? Really, it makes me feel so free. Love this country. The shingles that Andrew Epstein put up 2 years ago are holding up well, but the legal battle that came with them is far from over. This is talking about a man from Minnesota who committed the heinous crime of re-shingling his roof. He actually went out and did get a building permit. And he started the process of putting new shingles on his roof. But about halfway through the project, the code inspector came over and told him that he had to rip up all the old shingles before he could put the new shingles on. Mind you, he'd already put a bunch of shingles on over the old ones. So that means he'd have to rip up not only the old shingles, but all the new ones he put on, and then go buy some more and replace them. And he said, basically, he said no and just finished the project. He claims that he wasn't told anything about that rule when he began the project, but government doesn't really care whether they told you these little things. You're just supposed
of the law.
Somehow you're just supposed to know all the possible applicable building codes. And you're also bound to these building codes even though it's your house. And you supposedly own it, even though you really don't. You just pay rent to the city so that they can hire people to tell you what you can and can't do with your own property. That happens everywhere. Happens here in Keene, New Hampshire. Happens all across the country. In some very rural places, you might not have to deal with this crap, but in most larger towns, you do. And it touched off a long legal battle. And in March of last year, Espy was found guilty of 4 counts of violating the building code and 2 counts of violating a stop work order. So he was fined over $2,000 and sentenced to 90 days in jail. They told him he could be out in 2 months, though, if he served with good behavior.
And this is in the meantime, these cities are going bankrupt. And they have a code enforcer who's, I'm sure, going to be collecting one of those generous pensions if the city doesn't go bankrupt first. They've also got the money to prosecute him and then house him in jail. Meanwhile, they wonder why the economy's not picking up when they're taking people away from their jobs and they're putting them in jail and making everybody else pay for it.
There was a bit of good news here. They reduced the sentence down to 30 days. And there's an interesting quote here from Espy. He said, he actually rejected a proposal to put him, I think, under house arrest. I think he'd rather serve it in jail. I said, no, I don't want them. I think they were talking about monitoring bracelets. This isn't what we served in the military for, to be tied up in our own home. Actually,
yeah, it is.
It is.
That's exactly what it is.
I mean, this is what.
Sorry.
This is what it's turned into. I know that is how a lot of people feel. But
feelings are not reality. I'm sorry.
But,
yes.
This is the United States, and it's been this way for a long time.
If you're in the military, I'm sorry. I know they tell you you're fighting for freedom and liberty. No, you're fighting for putting people in jail for shingling their roofs. Sorry, it sucks, but that's what you're doing, and you're killing people for it. Sucks to be you. And when you actually realize that, it really sucks, because I know you didn't sign up to do that. Well, some of you might have.
But a lot of people were.
But a lot of
people were told that they were. Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's
well, and then
reality.
a lot of people get back. I mean, a lot of the people who do join the military realize just how little the government really cares about regular people from their military service.
Yeah.
Because quite often, oh well, you got damaged during your military service. Yeah, we're just not going to pay that much attention to your claims for compensation or medical care. I mean, this stuff doesn't happen across the board, but it happens quite often.
One thing I want to point out that I found interesting when you said, oh, the good news is they reduced his sentence from 90 days to 30 days. Tell me this, Nick. If you were thrown in jail for 30 days, could you keep your job, your mortgage, your way of life? Because I know I couldn't. I mean, are there a lot of people can just, oh, oh, thank you, government, for only 30 days in jail. Now I will continue to pay my bills and keep my job. No, not at all. You destroyed this man's life for shingling his roof. I just had to point that out.
Yeah, well, it's certainly true. I mean, some households can absorb something like that, but most people are going to lose their job in this kind of an economy. I mean, that's what you talk about. People, another problem we have in the U.S. is it kind of relates to this story because we're talking about a guy being given 3 months for, I don't know, fixing his own house, repairing his own property.
Leaky roof, which
Right.
he probably would have gotten fined and then thrown in jail if he allowed it to continue to roof.
Who cares if he does? I mean, who cares whether he uses best practices or not on his own roof?
It's his roof.
It's his roof. What does it affect except the inside of his house?
Maybe his bank might be mad if he has a mortgage.
But I mean, there's this, they write up these rules that say, well, if you violate the building code, we can throw you in jail for 30 days. Essentially what they're saying is we'll get you fired from your job, and there's a very good chance you'll miss your mortgage payments, lose your house. If you're married, there's a good chance to get divorced as a result of that.
And it really hurts the economy, which is
living in a car,
this
divorce,
is the kind of stuff
that's pretty sweet. Like, that's what you get for shingling your roof.
This bleeds the economy dry, and what's kind of ironic about this is some of the stimulus money goes towards things like giving cities money to hire building inspectors, which turn around and hurt the very people and throw them in jail and destroy the economy more.
It absolutely bleeds the economy dry. There's a lot. I feel like there would be. I feel like people would take a lot more initiative with things like working on their house or improving land or starting businesses. Any great number, pretty much anything productive that you can do is regulated by the government to the point where you have to fill out so much paperwork that most people who just want to clear some land or work on their roof
or fix my railing. You know, Nick,
or do something else.
I want to fix my railing at my house. And to make sure that I didn't go to jail for this, I called the code enforcer here in Keene, and I was like, yeah, I want to fix my railing and fix my steps. They're loose, broke one of them, and it's not safe. What's the regulations? And he's like, well, they have to be 4 feet from this, and we use these words I don't really understand because I'm not a contractor, and you have to have 36 inches from this and this and this, and I'm like, dude, right. I just want to make it safe.
But
I know how to make it safe, but I'd have to go and look up a roof and then look up building codes.
What most people end up doing is they'll just call in a contractor, or they'll put up with a wobbly step. No, but I'm not, Nick.
I can't afford a contractor. I could afford to go do it. I know how to do it safely.
You just have to put up with a wobbly step.
Well, I guess so.
Isn't it wonderful?
And the economy's not helped because I'm not going and purchasing lumber and
making improvements to a house in the city. The city's doing a great job with stuff like that.
Wonderful.
Let's just let the houses get progressively crappier because we don't want people to actually fix them up. We want to make them really scared that they're going to get fined if they actually work on their own house. Not the city councilor's house, not the Weasley little code enforcer's house. And sorry, I don't have too much compassion for those guys.
I don't know
Maybe
who
you're a
does.
nice person, but no, you're not.
Get a real job.
Asshole.
Get a real job.
Yeah. Yeah. Get a real job.
He's going to fine you, Nick, when he drives by your house, finds out your address. You're done for. It's code enforcers. I know that some of them, they hold grudges. They don't like being called out.
Yeah, he can do what he wants.
Yeah.
I feel like I could probably ruin his day as much as he could ruin mine.
He's paid to ruin your day, though.
Video montage. Video montage.
All right, enough about this, Nick. We plugged it early. We've got to get to it. The wussification, whether it be starting a toddlerhood, as I mentioned, with baby-proofing the house too much, or foam-proofing the playground so that the little Johnny doesn't ever bump his knee, or whatever it is out there. A new one came up today, and it's unsafe lunches. And you know, I know I lived my entire life bringing a bagged lunch to school and eating it, even though it wasn't refrigerated, and I turned out healthy. But apparently the government wants to fix it. Make sure that people are safe.
Yeah, we couldn't let them actually eat food the way kids have eaten bagged lunches for years. Apparently, who did this study here? Well, it's a study that's published in the journal Pediatrics. The survey that they did of bagged lunches for young children in elementary school found that 97% of meats, 99% of dairy, and 99% of vegetables were stored at unsafe temperatures in these traditional bagged lunches.
Now, you know what that means, Nick, to me? 99% of meats are stored at unsafe temperatures. And people aren't getting...
97.
Oh, I'm sorry, 97.
For some reason, more vegetables and dairy were at unsafe temperatures than meat.
If no one's getting sick, maybe they need to recalibrate. You know what I think? a little bit on the wild side and eating something that's not perfect will actually help your immune system. Well, I don't think that. It's actually the truth. Yeah, you don't want to eat spoiled meat, but well, go on. So what do they recommend here, Nick?
Well, they just recommend that you keep it within whatever the safety zone is.
What's the safety zone? 60?
No, it's they point out that the average study of perishable items that they found, the average in the study was 63.7 degrees, about room temperature. They don't actually say what the safety zone was. They say that, they talk about harmful bacteria can cause food poisoning, such as Salmonella, E. coli, Staphylococcus. They grow and multiply at temperatures between 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So I guess you're supposed to keep it at 39 degrees.
I'm sorry, Nick, but this is just ridiculous. It's
stupid.
stupid.
If there's a good amount of salmonella in the food to begin with, it's not really the temperature that's a problem. If it's going to poison you after 2 hours, it was just tainted food to begin with. It's not. If you can't let a sandwich sit out for 2 hours, then whatever food you're using is the problem.
Kids have not been dropping like flies at school because their lunches weren't stored at a proper temperature. This is just ridiculous. This is stupid. Yes, use common sense when storing food. But no, don't go overboard like this study's recommending me. If 99% of the foods are stored at unsafe temperatures and people are just fine, they're not unsafe temperatures. How about that? All right, Nick. I plugged this, so I got to get to it real quick. Child ID, FBI's first Apple iPhone app is unveiled. Yay, yay. The FBI released its first app for Apple's iPhone on Friday called Child ID. The app can store photos and information on your child, such as height, weight, date of birth, gender, ethnicity, hair and eye color, and whether or not they have pierced ears. Using this special app on your iPhone, you can also quickly and easily email the information to authorities within a few clicks. The phone can store multiple entries for multiple children. The app itself has no password or lockdown feature. Well, you know what you've created? You've just created a little way to put some information about all your kids in an iPhone. And if you've ever picked it and a pervert gets it, they've got all the information. If you, parent out there, don't remember the sex or age or height or weight or hair color of your kid, well, do better parenting. This iPhone app is only making your kids more unsafe and taking away your ability to be a parent, in my opinion. Of course, if you want it, Child ID. The FBI recommends it. I think we're out of time, Nick.
Yeah.
If you have different opinions, we'd love to hear them. Log on to our website, freemindstv.com, for more info. Oh, I guess we're maybe gone. I guess that's it, maybe. I see a black screen, so I'll go with yes. Good night, everybody. Oh, there we are.